Tonight is what we call an open forum. It's a monthly Zoom that we try and do from our department, the Answers and Advocacy Department, with the spotlight on something each time. And tonight, obviously, the spotlight is on banking. So that's what we're going to talk about. Basically, the next hour is really a chance for us to share with you some information, some of our personal experience, some of our knowledge. And it's very important for me to stress that obviously we're not bankers. We work for Nefesh Nefesh. And we don't know everything about this. And there are professionals who do know a lot more about these things than we do. So I will say it now, and I'm sure I'll say it more than once throughout this session. I really recommend speaking to a professional before you conduct any financial transactions. For a lot of you, this is not the first time you hear things like this, and I'm sure you've done this before, but it's just important to stress that this is very much an informational kind of thing, and hopefully we will be able to share and enlighten you in some manner with some information about this. And if there's anything we don't know, and I'm sure there's plenty we don't know, we will be happy to help you find the answer or try and direct you in the right to the right direction to find an answer for that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen in a minute with a short PowerPoint thing that we'll work off of. Like I said, some of you have sent in questions. I will try and address them as we go through this. And if there's something that I forgot, feel free to ask at the end. Okay, so give me a second. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm sure this is easier than it appeared. There we go. All right. So like I said, this is our post-Aliyah open forum, the spotlight on banking. As you can see written here below, will be on all the pages that we go through. Nefesh B'Nefesh is not associated with or it's not endorsed any specific bank, money changer, or financial institution. Like I said, we recommend you check with a professional before you make any financial decisions. Okay? So we're going to have a spotlight on banking. These are some of the things we're going to go through. It's very cute pictures here for you to get all the banking imagery in your head. This is what we're going to go through tonight. General banking, some facts and information about mortgages in general, mortgages, how they relate to Aliyah and Aliyah benefits. Something that's very commonly talked about, which is transferring money from overseas to Israel. That seems to be a topic, for obvious reasons, that comes up often. So I'll try and share whatever information I have about that. And some resources that we have, this, I should have said this in the beginning, this is being recorded, as you may have heard. We will be sending the recording to you guys in a few days. It usually takes a few days to turn it into something that we can send to you. So anybody registered or participating will get this recording. And it'll include the resources, some resources that we have here for you to refer to for banking information, banking questions, and basically just some general learning of how things work here in Israel. Okay, something that I was researching a few things here and looking back on some of the things that we did in the past in this manner, and it seems like something that's very common. It's a simple fact, but it's something that really works and that's really helpful, and that is. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you tonight is to really speak to, not professionals this time, but speak to your friends, speak to your neighbors, speak to your family here in Israel, speak to people who have made Aliyah. If you can figure out, speak to people who may be in a similar financial situation or a similar employment situation or retirement situation. And often they, with more experience as Olim and as living in Israel, very often they're a good resource, even better than us, than a post-Aliyah department for specific things. And it's like I said, a simple tip, but a very good and important one, and seems to be very useful. Okay, so we're going to talk about general banking first. Now, what does that mean? It means we all have bank accounts. All of you Olim should have as part of your Aliyah process, opened up a bank account with your Israeli Tudat Zehut number in order to get your Sal Klita from Mishar Klita. Okay? If there are people on this Zoom who are not Olim or who did not make Aliyah yet, but are living in Israel, so some of these things may not be as relevant to you, and some may be. But we're going to focus this towards Olim and people who, wherever it's relevant, Aliyah benefits and things associated with Aliyah. So like I said, you should have all at some point opened up a bank account in Israel with your Israeli Tudat Zehut and are now conducting regular transactions, regular banking here in Israel for the most part. And I'm sure the first thing, or one of the first things you notice, is that it's very different than in Israel, than in the U.S. or wherever you, Canada, or wherever you may have made Aliyah from. Banking in Israel it's almost like a need that you have, but not a privilege that is given to you by any bank. So, in other words, you have to have a bank account. You need to conduct certain things, but it's not often that you're being competed for on the surface of things, right? In your face. You don't see that. You don't feel it. And like I said, you're really relying on other people's information as to where to go. So when you do accept the fact that you have a bank account here and you're open and you're conducting your services and your banking life here in Israel, you'll see some of the differences. One main one, and it's actually the last thing on this screen, on choosing a branch, but we'll start with that, is that choosing a branch that you're going to go to the bank is something to think about for a second. Nowadays in 2024, now that we're in 2024, most of us don't go to the bank very often. Okay, we conduct most of our work, most of our transactions, I should say, digitally, whether it's on an app or on the website. We don't really go in that much to the bank, and that's something to think about when you're choosing the branch that you're going to. Is it important that it be close to your house? Is it important that it has an English-speaking clerk? And everybody's different. What's good for me may not be good for you and for other people, but it's something to think about when you choose the branch. And why did I start with this? Because it's important to understand that in Israel, branches are specific. In other words, not every Mizrahi branch or not every Bank Leumi branch will have the same fees or the same services or the same ability to do things for you. Before I go any further, if I can ask anybody who can, please mute your computer. Okay, there's some background noise, just for the sake of everybody else. And obviously anybody who wishes to be on camera, that's great. We'd love to see some faces. You can see each other. It's not a requirement, of course. Okay, so I'll go on. So choosing a branch, like I said, each branch is very specific. So if you have a bank account in Bank Leumi on King George Street in Yerushalayim, and you're in a Bank Leumi in Ra'anana, you may not be able to do any transaction. You may not be able to walk into that bank and get very much done. Maybe very basic things, but they will not have access to your account. They will not be able to do pretty much anything except for some basic, like I said, informational stuff. So it is important to have an idea of where you want to conduct your business and which branch you want to go to, but it's important to remember that it's not it's not the most important thing because we don't visit the bank that often. Okay? Now, for some people who may not want to use digital sources or resources, having an English-speaking clerk is important. And that's another example of where it comes in, to ask your neighbors and your friends and your peers and see if they have any advice for you. And if not, feel free to reach out to us. We can sometimes navigate and help you find the right branch in your neighborhood. But that's something that's really specific for each individual. Okay. We'll go back to the top here. The differences between U.S. and Israel. In general, I have a bank account in the U.S. I do very little there. I live in Israel. The usage of the app between Chase and Bank Leumi, as somebody who is bilingual, I'm not belittling that at all. So for me to do my business in Hebrew here and in English there, the apps and the services that they give are roughly the same. I would say very easily and quickly that the customer service that I get from Chase is significantly better and quicker and more specific and exact than I get from Bank Leumi. But you should know that most banks here have been going through a reform of some sort, especially Bank Leumi, with how quick they want to get back to their customers. So while banks here have a bad rap, and especially the customer service of the banks, give it a shot. If you need, you'll see that there has been improvement, and usually the turnaround time is a lot better. So on some things, you'll see that the more you get into it, there are not such big differences between the U.S. and Israel. Sure, it's a different language, it's a different system, and there are absolutely plenty of differences. But some of the ones, the tachlis ones that we use on a day-to-day basis may not be so different. Okay? Credit cards are definitely a different monster, let's call it, here and in the U.S. at least. I've never lived in Canada, so I can't really speak so much about Canada. But I think there's two main differences that I can think. Well, the main difference that I can think of really with credit cards here in Israel and the U.S. is that in Israel you pay your credit card statement, your bill, you pay it in full every month. Okay, similar to the U.S., you can choose the date that you want it to be paid. I think that you can do that in the U.S. You choose the date that you want it to be paid in the month, but here you can choose to pay part of it or a minimum fee or whatever it is. The entire amount gets deducted from your checking account. So if you don't have that money in your checking account, that's a problem. And certain things may bounce and it may start, we don't have the same kind of credit reporting and stuff that you do in the U.S., but there is a reporting of some sort, and there is, balance and checks made on a person's account. So it's important to remember and to understand that every month your credit card bill gets paid in full. Okay.
Yes, may I just jump in for a
Sure,
second?
please,
Hi, everyone.
please.
Good evening. I'm Liz. Just piggybacking on what, excuse me, what Yit said. Whereas you might be in minus with a credit card company in North America and therefore pay it back slowly with interest, here you're essentially doing the same, but it's your bank account that's going into minus rather than your relationship with a credit card company. So it's important to find out from your bank how much minus your account is allowed to go into. Okay, and there are fees for being in minus as well. And the other thing that I believe Yitz will touch upon is the apps that allow you to make bank transfers to friends and family. Like in the States, there's like Vimo and things like that. Whereas here, we have some others that Yitz will get into.
Great, thank you, Liz. So before I touch on it, that was actually the next thing I was going to talk about. But before that, I wanted to say one other thing about credit cards. I started to say that there were two main differences that I can think of, but the more I think about it, this is a little bit of a similarity between the two, but it's important to know what is out there. And there are bank credit cards, and then there are external credit cards where they're not necessarily given to you by or offered to you by your bank, such as Leumi or Mizrahi, rather from larger institutions, also banking institutions, but that they provide you with a credit card. It's obviously linked to that bank account, to the Leumi or Mizrahi or discount bank account, and the payments are conducted from there, but they are external from the bank. And similar to the U.S., they all have their own perks and their own point system and their own, ways to lure you in and have you, use that credit card and not your bank's credit card. But it exists, and you'll see, advertisements for things like Visa Cal. Obviously, there are the El Al Fly card. There's the Super Farm card. I think it's called Barach Li Hashem. It's called doesn't matter what it's called right now, but there's a Super Farm credit card. And they all have their benefits and their perks. Supersol, there's a Supersol credit card. So these all have their benefits and perks. So what's the big problem with having too many of them? That they all carry a fee of some sort. So while they have their benefits and they have their perks, and then your bank has their credit cards, just like in the US or anywhere else, you don't want to get too carried away and have a bank account for everything. It is not as common here, if at all, as it is in the US, that when you sign up for a credit card, and you use 5,000 shekel or $5,000 or 10, whatever it is, that you're all of a sudden getting 50,000 points that's good for travel. That's like $500, $600. There are perks. They're significantly smaller in size. And, you got to do your research, just like you would have done with the Chase Sapphire or the Chase this or the Chase that or all the other ones. Then the same concept exists here. You want to do your research. You don't want to just sign up for everything and everything. They do have fees, and we'll talk about fees soon, obviously. But it's just something to pay attention to. Okay, there are bank credit cards, and then there are external from bank credit cards. Okay. The next thing, as Liz brought up, which is very important and very relevant right now, are these apps and methods of paying people and getting paid even via these apps. In Israel, primarily they're called Paybox or Bit. There may be others, but those are the two main ones. And they are similar to things that you may have back in the US or in Canada, wherever, such as Venmo and I think Zelle. And there may be others that are like that. Some are relevant to the bank itself, and some may be able to be used not even going through a bank, such as in Israel we have like I said, we have Paybox and Bit. So Paybox, while it's connected to a bank account, and if you don't have funds in your Paybox account, it would draw from your actual bank account. It is not necessarily affiliated with a certain bank, or you don't need to have a certain bank an account in a certain bank in order to have a Paybox account. Okay. The other one that's very common is Bit, and people very often pay for things with Bit or can be paid with Bit. We have a farmer's market in our building where our office is, and one of the ways to pay is you can scan a QR code, and that person's Bit account will jump into your Bit app on your phone, and you can pay them. It's actually a magnificent thing, and it saves a lot of frustration when you don't have cash or they don't take a credit card. But it's a financial transaction. It's important to pay attention to your own personal transactions and the amounts that we do. Sometimes people get carried away with these things because it feels so easy to just swipe your phone. It's also important to pay attention to the fees that are associated to that. Now, I'll let you all do your own research about this. I'll share what I know. Liz, if you or Roni want to jump in on this, you feel free. But with Paybox, if you keep money in your Paybox account and you transfer money from one person to another, Paybox to Paybox, it doesn't really cost anything. Bit, I think with Paybox, the only time you pay any money is when you release it into your account. With Bit, you're not really keeping a balance in a Bit account. It's really connected to your bank account or to a credit card right away. And all monies that you receive go into your account, and monies that you're paying either are coming from your credit card or from your checking account. And I believe that each time you get a Bit payment, there is a fee that is associated with it. Okay? Liz, anything to add on that? No. Okay, good. All right, so that's a lot of information so far, and I should have maybe said this earlier on, but I'll say it now. You may not learn anything new tonight, or anything life-changing or earth-shattering. Mix those up a little bit, but this is just stuff going over things that exist that are in the banking industry and in the world that we live in here in Israel. And I hope that some of the stuff that that interests you or that you're questioning, we touch on and we answer those questions or help satisfy that information. Okay? All right, let's talk about fees. One of the main differences, forget differences. Banks in Israel charge you fees for just about everything you do. Okay, just about every transaction that you do in the bank, there will be a fee associated to it. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead a few pages here for a second and show you an example of a fee sheet so you see what it looks like. This is from Bank Discount. In a second, I'll talk more about the different discounts or ways to negotiate or just some tips and common things about fees in Israel. But this just gives you an idea of what a bank fees sheet, for lack of a better word, I made that up, but like a rate sheet for mortgages in America, this is like a fees sheet. And every time you open up an account, you're supposed to get this. It's almost like a good, what's it called, good faith or a disclosure of some sort that you're supposed to know ahead of time what the fees are. And I'm just going to run through this a little bit to show you an example of some of the things that you're charged for, and specifically I chose these two because they are for Olim Chadashim. Okay, and I'll start off with the difference between the two. I hope you can see this clearly. It is small. It's just an idea, really. They're both for Olim Chadashim. They're both offered from Bank Discount, and they're both for most regular standard bank transactions. The difference between the two is that the one on the right, and I highlighted this in yellow, hope you can see it, is that, and this is a common thing that will affect the fees that you pay in your bank and affect the quote-unquote relationship that you have with your bank. This is a big factor, what I'm about to say, and that is whether or not you have regular money coming in. The most common regular money coming in is a salary. Okay? So if somebody has their salary coming into their bank, into a bank account, the bank is more likely to give you some things back, or to make life easy on you, or to cut fees, because you're an ongoing, regular customer that's going to constantly have money coming in. Okay? So immediately somebody may say, well, what if I don't work? So I don't get these privileges? So obviously that's taken into consideration, and there are some things that are relevant for, like I said, regular money coming in, which can be discussed with the bank. But the other thing that's highlighted here, the second thing here that says in Hebrew, is Schum Pikdonot, which basically it says Schum Pikdonot Kaspiyim or Niyarot Erech. So Schum Pikdonot Kaspiyim can be loosely translated to CDs, certificates of deposit or savings accounts in the bank. And after the slash mark, the Niyarot Erech are like stock accounts, okay, like a trading account. So if somebody doesn't have a salary coming in, but they put in certain money into a CD or savings, or the money that's going to be traded and used, then they can often ask for the same kind of terms or benefits or perks, let's call it, as somebody who has money coming in. Okay? So that is a big factor and the big point. I'm going to touch on another bank that really comes in, but that is the relationship that the bank wants with you. Okay? They want money coming in, they want regular transactions, they want an ongoing relationship, and that allows them to give you the most. Now, is that fair? Does that make sense? That's not really for us to determine. That's kind of the way it is here. And I said this earlier, branches are different. Okay, so a Mizrahi branch in one city and a Mizrahi branch in another city may have different fees, or different discounts on the fees that they're going to offer you. The fees should be the same. This rate sheet should be on every bank discount. It should be on the website. It should be what's given out in every bank discount branch. But they may have certain places where they're going to give you a bigger discount or a different fee based on the relationship. So that being said, I'm just going to run through a few of them. The purpose why I put these side by side is that you'll see that there's a lot more waiving of fees and lower fees for the the highlighted section, the one on the right, at least my right, versus the one on the other side with no highlighted section, where there are certain benefits and certain waiving of fees for Olim Chadashim. Remember, these two rate sheets are for Olim Chadashim, but there's a difference where one has money coming in and the other one doesn't. Okay, so we're going to take the first line. It says, Ula ayidei pakid, any transaction done by a clerk, there would be no fee for somebody who has their money as a salary coming in, versus a 50% discount from the rate sheet. Ta'arifon is the Hebrew word for the bank fee sheet, okay, basically. So it'd be a 50% discount off of the regular bank fee, okay? Whereas the next line, which is a transaction on, some kind of a non-clerk related fee, which transaction like an app or an ATM, it would be free, okay, in both scenarios for an Oleh Chadash, not for me necessarily, but for Olim Chadashim in these situations, okay? Let's look at another one, even the next line under that. A minimum, they're basically going to charge you a fee for not doing transactions. So if you don't do enough transactions, there's also a fee for that. Okay, like I said, just about everything you do, there's going to be a fee. Okay, it's also something you need to accept. Some people have a mental block with this matter, and it's like, this is my money. How can they charge me to do all these things with my money? But that's just the way it is here. Okay, so it's important to accept that. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk about ways to try and lower that number or negotiate that number and stuff. But it's important to understand that it exists. Okay, so this third line here is showing a fee that would be taken from somebody, from a client, for doing too few amount of transactions. So in this case, for an Oleh Chadash, it would be waived, patur, versus an Oleh Chadash who has no money coming in, nothing incentivizing the bank. It would be whatever the accepted amount is by that bank, kamikubal bank, whatever the regular fee is on the rate sheet. Okay, so there's just some examples to what a rate sheet looks like and where the potential differences could be. It's something you can ask for when you open your account. It's something you can ask for even after you open your account. You can go into your branch and say, let me see this in writing. I want to feel it, not just on the website. I want to feel it. I want to see it. I want to compare. So you can do that, okay? I'm not going to go through this whole thing for sure. I'm just going to show you that the next section here, for instance, I'm circling here, has to do with managing a stock account. In other words, managing an investment account, okay? So you can see that here, the second line, for instance, it's 0.15% versus 0.4%. So these fees vary, and it's very clear, black and white, that when you are engaging the bank and have money coming in or money put aside in their bank, which obviously means they're, using your money and benefiting from your money, then it's easier for them to offer you a cheaper rate with the fees, and they want to intensify. They want to keep you, so they're going to offer you more and more stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about fees in general. Okay, first things first. An Oleh Chadash is interestingly enough, our department spends some time in the Knesset, and one of the committees that we go to in the Knesset has to do with banking for Olim and regulations and things that have to do with, it's the Vadat Aliyah V'Klita, and sometimes they speak about banking. So recently, I heard there that it's not a law, but it's so embedded in the country, or at least in the Vadat, this committee, that banks should, and the chairman of the committee asked the representatives of the bank, he said, I'm not even going to ask. He said, I want to clarify with all of you that all Olim Chadashim are being offered discounts on fees or no fees, and help, and Bank Leumi now is the app in English, but he was very adamant about the banks and the representatives of Bank of Israel making sure that things are being improved and offered and given to Olim. Remember, Aliyah from North America is just a part of the Aliyah to Israel. There's obviously from other countries as well. But there's a committee that discusses things just that have to do with Olim. And this is one of the things that came up lately. And so I knew that it wasn't a law, but I was shocked that it was so part of the Knesset committee, and it was on their agenda to talk about it. But it's something that you should know. As Olim, you should know that the government, nothing to do with Nefesh B'Nefesh or any other organization, but the government itself is fighting for Olim, cares about Olim, and wherever they can, in this specific scenario that I'm talking about, are doing what they can to push those who are responsible to help Olim where they can. Okay? So, for starters, Olim Chadashim are offered and should be offered, and if not, you can ask for it, should be given a bank account with no fees for at least the first year after Aliyah. Now, I say this often in our post-Aliyah sessions. If you walk into the bank and say, hey, here's my Tudat Zut, I came from America a week ago, I want an account with no benefits, with no fees, they'll say to you, that's great, welcome. Can I please see your Teudat Oleh, proof from the Ministry of Aliyah and Integration that you made Aliyah and are entitled to benefits? And if you have that, great, you'll show it to them, and I'm sure they'll offer you everything they can. But if you don't have it yet, because you made Aliyah here in Israel and have not made it to Mishra Klita yet, as opposed to somebody who came in on a flight and may have gotten that document in the airport, then they may not give you that, the no fees benefit for Olim just yet. Now, it's very important. It's not a benefit from the government. Like I said, it's not a law. It's not something given to you by Mishra Aliyah V'Klita, the Ministry of Aliyah. Rather, it's something that banks are offering and should offer Olim Chadashim to help, with a little bit of a softer landing, a little bit of a welcome to Israel. We know you need a bank account, so let's try and have you as our client, and we'll make it a little bit easier for you while you do that. So that should help with your first year. If you have fees and you do, and you just never made it to the bank, go try, especially if it hasn't been too far down the road. That being said, everybody and anybody in Israel, not an Oleh Chadash, can too negotiate their fees at the bank. Okay, they can walk into the bank or speak to their, a representative from their bank, and ask them or semi-demand a reduction of fees or no fees at all. Especially, as I said before, the more you conduct business with the bank, the more of a case you have. But it's important to know that, and I'm sure you've heard this before, most things are negotiable. Okay, same too with your bank fees and credit card fees. I spoke about credit cards before. Almost all credit cards, especially, I'm not encouraging you to necessarily threaten to leave, but it's a common practice done worldwide, not just in Israel, that if the retention department gets hold of you, they'll offer you things in order to keep you. So for some people, it's a common thing once a year to call and say, I see you charge me fees again, either waive it for another year or I'm walking. And, they may call you bluff, they may not, but it's not the craziest thing in the world to ask for that. Okay? And again, I'll say, the more business you have, the more things you're conducting with the bank, the more you have, the more leeway you have, or the more ability you have to negotiate. Most banks do not have clerks anymore, or less clerks. Most banks don't have like a cashier anymore. But if you do conduct a transaction, if you do go into a bank and you want to wire or do a bank transfer of 500 shekel to your granddaughter who lives in Haifa, there will be a fee for that, right? We talked about fees. The fee for doing it with a person will be significantly higher than if you do it via an app or online, okay? So while that's not a negotiation method or anything like that, it's just a way to manage your fees better. Anything you do with a person, a real life person, will be double or triple what you'll do with an online or a digital component. Okay, I think the average comes out to be around a shekel 65 for any digital transaction versus 4 to 5 shekel, sometimes even more, for anything done with a live person. Okay. What else can I tell you about fees? We said that you can negotiate that. I'm just going to see if there's any questions from the questions that you sent in that have to do with fees. All right. A lot of you may have money in another currency, or transferring money over to Israel on a regular basis. So I'm going to talk about transfers in a second, obviously, because that's a very important thing, or in a few minutes. But I just want to emphasize the fact that banks, as we know, are in the business of making money, and therefore some of those things that may become a regular transaction for you of transferring money monthly from the U.S. to Israel, or anything that has to do with conversions and stuff like that, all these things carry a fee. Some of them are negotiable. Some of them are more negotiable than others. Some are negotiable based on the size of the transaction. Okay, a transfer or conversion of $5,000 versus $50,000 is different. It's different the way the bank makes their money, and therefore different with what they can charge you or give you a discount on those fees. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about wiring in a second, but it's important to understand that there are regular transactions that olim or people who carry accounts in another country may conduct that do carry fees or larger fees. One thing I'm going to talk about real quickly in 2 sentences is, for instance, your Social Security money. People who are getting Social Security from the U.S. Can relatively easily have that money sent to your bank account here in Israel in shekel. So if you're getting it in a bank account in America, wiring it to Israel, converting it to Israel, in Israel to shekels, you're doing many more transactions, and not cheap ones either, than setting it up with the U.S. government, with the embassy here in Israel, so that it's sent directly from Social Security to your account in Israel in shekel. So there are things like this, and that's why I said earlier, your people who are in similar situations as you may have nuggets of information that will be helpful to reduce the costs and the fees and the uncertainties or that feeling of being ripped off as much as possible. So share with each other, ask questions, and try and get answers from other people. I visited a few banks prior to having this session in order just to really check in on some things, see if there's been any changes from things that we know. And one thing that I noticed that was interesting was that the IRS checks that people get as refunds from the government in the U.S. Very often there's no problem depositing them, but some banks just won't do it. And some banks won't do it for a child. In other words, if the account is not in the name on the check, there's nothing to talk about. They won't do it. And, I sat, an hour apart with 2 different banks. And one said, yeah, it's no problem. We know how to deal with that. It's, it's a little bit more work and stuff, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal for an individual's check. Nobody will do, according to them, in a child's name. But, the second bank said, it's a case by case kind of thing, and it's not across the board that they would deposit an IRS check. Just something to pay attention to. Some banks won't deposit any U.S. checks at all into your account. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a dollar or a foreign currency component in your account. Okay, once you have a shekel account, they can what's called open up. There's different codes for the account. They can open up the ability to have dollars or euros or whatever other currency somebody may want. Excuse me. So it's definitely okay to have a foreign currency component, but at the same time, not every bank will deposit a check that is a foreign check in a foreign currency. Okay, so obviously you can wire and so on and so forth, but checks are becoming more and more difficult to deal with, especially when it comes to foreign checks and foreign currency. Okay. Well, there's plenty more we can talk about banking. I do want to move on to some of the other things that I was hoping to talk about. I'll give a few minutes to mortgages. Mortgages in general, obviously the same concept. You're buying a house, you need or choose to take some money from the bank. You pay interest on that money, and you pay back the loan over time. There is an Aliyah benefit associated with the mortgage and an Aliyah benefit associated with the purchase tax, which is kind of banking related, so I'll touch on it quickly. And in my opinion, as somebody who was a mortgage broker in the past and a banker actually in the past, I don't think that either one of those benefits. Well, let's talk about the mortgage. The mortgage benefit is not a great benefit, and not because nobody cares about it. It's just not the restriction that's on it is a small restriction of what kind of loan the benefit can be on. We're not going to go into this in depth. It's not about mortgages, but the Aliyah benefit that's related to the mortgage, and I'll be happy to discuss this with anybody who wants to reach out to us. I'm sure Liz and Roni shared our department contact information, and I'm sure they'll share it a few more times. But if anybody wants to talk about mortgage, I'll be happy to. There is an Aliyah benefit. It's good for 15 years. It is on a very specific type of mortgage that can be connected to the rest of your mortgage. And that's not the greatest type of loan. It's linked to the cost of living in Israel, so it's a variable component. But it does exist. Happens to be that the housing ministry and the same committee that I was talking about are being asked and are working on trying to make it more relevant to today's times and maybe have it changed to a different kind of mortgage, or that the Ole can choose where to put it. Hasn't happened yet. It may happen. So those are really the pros and cons about that, the mortgage benefit. It exists. It is a little bit of a lower rate, but there are restrictions, and you need to look into it in depth. The concept of a mortgage broker 10 years ago wasn't so common in Israel. Now it's very common, especially for Anglos or anybody who may need some buffering between the bank and themselves. Mortgages are almost across the board given only by banks. Sometimes there are financial institutions, when it comes to reverse mortgages for senior citizens and stuff like that. There are some insurance companies that will conduct a reverse mortgage, but it's not very common in Israel. The purchase tax, this is a perfect example of when you need to speak to a professional, a real estate attorney. There is a benefit for Olim Chadashim versus non-Olim, a regular Israeli citizen. But at the same time, the tax rates for a first-time homebuyer for an Israeli citizen, which everybody who made Aliyah is an Israeli citizen, may not be a first-time homebuyer in Israel, is often lower than the taxes for an Oleh Hadash. Okay, it is very much dependent on the purchase price of the property. But again, there are times where the regular purchase tax for an Israeli will be cheaper than the benefit offered to an Oleh Hadash. Okay, so when you're buying your property, you should definitely speak to an attorney and ask him to just plug in the numbers. It's a very simple thing for him to do. And either it's worth it or it's not worth it. That's all. Okay? The differences between Israel and abroad, I'm not going to go into this too much because it will turn into a mortgage conversation. I don't want that to happen. There are differences between the types of mortgages we offer here in Israel and the types that are offered or that are common in America, especially after 2008. There are also different Bank of Israel rules and regulations for Israeli citizens and non-Israeli citizens. So if you bought an apartment 20 years ago as a foreigner and you're looking to buy a property now, you will have different mortgage restrictions and regulations than you did as a foreigner. Some are better, some are worse. Doesn't matter. We're not getting into it, but they are different. Again, another example of where a professional may be very beneficial. Okay? All right. Now, yes.
Hi. There is a question. Hi. And I don't know the answer. Maybe you do. Somebody who's was told that mortgages are not available for remodeling just for the original purchase. Is that true?
No, it is not true. But of course, that can't be said across the board. Now, if the question was remodeling, such as renovating one's home, right? Not refinancing the mortgage. Because obviously you can refinance your mortgage to better rates or to relevant rates. at the time, when it's relevant, excuse me. But there are definitely loans given for renovations. And again, we're not going to turn this into a mortgage conversation, but the way the bank looks at it is what the final value will be of your remodeled home. And then they can conduct a loan to value based on that number, not what it is now. Especially if you're buying a home that needs construction, you absolutely can get a mortgage for the purchase and the construction, often in one loan, not too complicated. Mortgage brokers know how to do this without a problem. When you own your home and you just say, you know what, I want to spend 200,000 shekel and remodel, a couple of rooms or the whole inside, whatever it is, you can also get a loan for that. It's a different kind of loan, but definitely possible and doable. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going to skip one page and then we're going to get back to this because that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this thing. This last page, and like I said, this will all be sent to you on the recording, with the recording, excuse me. These are some resources that we think will be helpful for you. The top 3 are money transfer companies. We're going to talk about that in a second. What they are and where the benefits are, but these are some of them. These are some that we're not recommending one over the other or any of them, but these are some that we know. We've had them, present on at various occasions or events that we had, or written articles on our website. And the same thing with the resources for either navigating the Israeli banking system or just financial guidance here in Israel. And we have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel has a lot of different things on it. Some of it includes videos on banking or just some other information that's banking related. Okay, so let's talk about wire transfers and the difference between banks and third parties. And this is very relevant for a lot of people on the screen because some of you still have funds in the U.S. or property in the U.S. or investments in the U.S. and either are dealing with bringing it over now or will be dealing with it. And it can be, and I'm sure you've heard tons of stories already, it can be very frustrating. It's unfortunate that it's very frustrating. And the common and most clear sentence that any of you would probably say is, again, it's my money. Why is this such a complicated thing? I earned this money. I inherited this money. I chose right on the blackjack table, whatever it is. It's my money. I shouldn't have such a hard time transferring that money from one country to another. Okay? Obviously it is, and you've heard stories, I'm sure, nightmares from people about how complicated it is. But that being said, most transactions that are easily explainable and documentable and that make sense will be approved. Okay? This varies by branch, by bank, by city, by the side of the bed the clerk woke up in that morning, perhaps. But across the board, the Bank of Israel will allow a person to transfer money from their account in one country to their account in another country. A reference will always be asked for and always be needed. Okay, if you're transferring $500,000, they want to know where that money came from. Okay, if you have there's various proofs that you can send, but obviously if you sold a house or closed an investment portfolio or even earned money via investments, that's fine. That's documentable. It has your name on all the documents. Okay? But if you took the same $500,000 and $100,000 is coming from Chase, $100,000 is coming from the Cayman Islands, $100,000 is coming from an inheritance, and I don't know what the rest is, but you get my point. It becomes more complicated. And the bank will question that more, even if it's all your money, even if it's yours. It's just more complicated and more difficult for them to approve. Now, what is the concern? What is obviously the concern? It's money laundering. Not a new thing. It exists all around the world. A number of years back already, the U.S. and Israel entered a treaty to minimize or get rid of as much money laundering as possible between the two countries and their citizens. And there's an agreement and a treaty between the two countries with a lot of tax-related things, and that's why most of you, when you opened up your bank account, were asked to fill out a FATCA form, which is relevant to exactly what I'm talking about, and you needed to fill out a W-9 and include your social security number. So this is exactly the reason why, because of this treaty and this agreement that exists. It always existed, but it's more governed and more. It's basically, it happens a lot more now, and it's a requirement now by the banks to have you sign those documents. And this is the main reason why it's so difficult. Okay, now the costs that are associated. Well, before we get to the costs, basically what happens is when you send over money, it needs to go through compliance. Now, compliance at a bank is significantly harder, just happens to be, than a third party. But they're all governed by the Bank of Israel. They all have to go through the same Bank of Israel money laundering checks. Okay? But the banks sometimes are more difficult with themselves before even presenting it, and very often they don't want to deal with certain transactions, and that's why they make it difficult. Okay? It's not that they're taking your money and investing it somewhere for 6 months while you're pulling the hair out of your head trying to buy this apartment. Okay? They may not be moving very quickly, but they are investigating and looking into certain things. Okay? The better the documents are as a source of the funds, the easier the compliance will be. And I said this before, I'm going to say it again. It does vary between banks and branches, and this is where the third-party companies come into play. And I'm not by any means encouraging anybody to use a third party over a bank, but there are some benefits to using these companies, and I'm going to touch on some of them. And at the end of the day, you'll conduct your own research and make your own decisions, but this exists, and it's important to know that it exists. There are companies such as Oleh Pay that we showed on the last page, and Israel Transfer, that basically they conduct, that's all they do. That's their business, is they conduct transfers for people from other countries into Israel. Like I said, they follow the same guidelines and the same money laundering rules of Bank of Israel. They have compliance departments, and they have to, research all your documents that you send in. But like I said before, the compliance at the bank is significantly harder. It seems to be the case that it's significantly harder at the bank, and these companies have their ways of making it a little bit easier for the client. Another thing that's important to know is that most of these companies, and it's, again, not across the board, don't charge you any money until you actually convert the funds. So when you send the money from your Citibank account to Israel Transfer or Oleh Pay or any of these companies, and haven't converted yet because it's going through all this compliance, you're not paying anything for that just yet. You'll pay when you convert the money, when it actually comes into play, when you actually come to use it. How do these companies work? What do they do really? Basically what they do is they have their own bank accounts, and they have the ability and the permission from Bank of Israel to open sub-bank accounts. So if you transfer your money from Citibank or Chase to Israel to their account, they create a sub-account to their bank account for you, hold the money in there, convert the money on the day that you agree on, at a rate that you know of, and the money is then in shekel, in Israel, and transfer it to either your bank account, or if you're doing a transaction, buying a home, buying a child a home, whatever it is, you can transfer that money to the seller, to the escrow account, whatever you need to do. Okay? Now, sometimes real estate lawyers will encourage these kind of things because they don't want to have an escrow account. Okay? So having this kind of an account for the money to be transferred to and then to the seller is sometimes a way that real estate purchases are done. I don't know the ins and outs about that at all, but I know that it exists. And another thing that you should speak to your real estate attorney about, the difference between conducting the transfer and conversion of the money for such a big purchase, for such a big transaction, with a bank or with a third party. Okay? The banks, almost across the board, will use a higher beginning point to conduct the conversion and the negotiation on the rate than a third party company. The third party use something called the mid-market rate. I'm not going to go into that. I wouldn't even be able to explain it very well. But if you know what that is, then you'll understand. It's basically, in two sentences, is basically the going conversion rate between banks. Okay? So they're not going to do your transaction, your conversion at that rate, but they use that as a basis and go off of that. Banks don't necessarily use that, or they start at a much higher number from that, and often are more expensive than a third party. You need to check that out for yourself. But that's one of the main reasons why, is because of the starting point of the bank, of the bank versus the third party. And again, the fact that you transfer money into your account, even if it's not released to you in checkout, but you transferred it to your bank, not a third party, but to your bank, you're already paying a fee on that. Whereas I said earlier, the third party will wait until the conversion happens before they charge you for the fee. Okay? These third parties also have a little bit more flexibility with the fees they charge for the transactions. Some of them can issue bank checks, which is necessary sometimes for buying a home. Some of them can't. And sometimes that's where a bank will be your only place to send your money, because you need a bank check. Okay? So you really got to do your research. You really got to, see what your options are. But it's important to know that there are options. And for the obvious reason, these companies will compete for your business because you are relevant to them and may or may not be conducting more foreign currency transfers and transactions. Okay, so, a lot of this stuff is work and research and asking people and asking again and asking a third person. And it's very easy for some people to say, you know what, I'm just going to go the easy route and pay whatever I'm being charged. And if that's the way you want it, that's okay. Everybody's entitled to do what they want. But there are things out there that exist in Israel to help reduce these costs or reduce these financial transactions, so that it's not as scary or as bad of an experience that you have with banking in Israel. And like I said very early on, it has a bad rap here in Israel because of things that were in the past and because of difficulties with things such as transferring your own money. But it's important to learn the system and never stop learning, really, because things change. And like I said much earlier about the fees, that this can be an annual negotiation. It takes work. It's not mandatory. You don't have to do it, but you should do it if you have the ability and the energy to do it. It does take research. It does take some work, but some of these things here on the screen will help with that. Our post-Aliyah department can help with some things. We have, we try not to, like I said earlier on, try not to refer to any specific professionals, but we do know people and we do live here and we do have personal experiences and stuff like that and can share that where possible. Okay? I think that's it for the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I don't want to keep anybody much longer. We're just about reaching an hour here. So obviously, if anybody does want to sign off, then I hope you learned something from this. I hope this was helpful in some manner. And if we can help with anything, then please let us know. I will plug one of our programs that we have right now that's relevant to this, and that's something that we call Translation Tuesdays, that we're conducting in our Jerusalem campus. So if you have some bank documents that you got and you don't know what it says, or you need help accessing the app or the bank account on your website, or understanding where to get certain things from within there, it could be a good thing to sign up to our Translation Tuesday and come and see if that's something that could be beneficial for you. We'll be happy to help you with that. Like I said, we're not bankers, but most of us do know Hebrew well enough to explain these things, and we'd be happy to do that.
Yes, I
I'll
just
be
want to add,
happy. Please.
our open forum next month is with the spotlight. It's with Rivka Leibowitz, who is a financial advisor. It's going to be a spotlight on finances in Israel, a more general discussion. You'll get an email about that as well, just like you got an email about this evening's presentation.
Okay, so I'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody has.
There's a question
in
that
the
came in
chat,
earlier.
in person. Sure.
I don't know the answer. I don't know if you do. Are CDs stocks insured similar to FDIC?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that if you have a CD in the bank, there is a component of safety that you do have, that your money will be there when you need it or when it comes due. I don't know how to tell you who's insuring that, and my gut tells me that it's Bank of Israel, but that's a great thing to investigate with your bank. Okay. Yes, Stuart.
Questions. I sent both of them in, one with the RSVP. If I bring in like $40,000 or $50,000 a year from investment income, my retirement, is there a limit that once you go over a certain amount in wire transfers, there's an additional percent tax or something like that? Is there a limit?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
I've 100% the question for an accountant. Okay.
I have.
But I could tell you that there's a 10,000 shekel reporting limit.
That's okay.
That's quite common that people know about.
Yep.
So 5 of those or 6 $9,500 ones may be different than one $50,000 one. And banks and these third-party companies are easier and more lenient with smaller transactions than big ones. So, it's a great question also for where it may be easier actually in these kind of cases to ask that to a third party as opposed to your banker, unless you have a great, knowledgeable to the American world also banker in your branch. These third party companies live this stuff. They should know how to answer that properly.
This is much more important. I met with Israel Transfer after I got here. I spent a lot of time with them, filled out all the paperwork. I was at the very end, and they said, we need a source of funds letter. So I prepared it. My first accountant sent it in. They said, nope, he's not a certified public accountant. I had 2 other accountants, financial advisor, 3 different accountants from the US who were willing to do this. They said, no, it has to be a CPA. I would like to work with them, but what are they? I don't know. I'm a normal consumer. What's going on?
I'm sure. I don't know. I don't know why that is a requirement of theirs. Did you try any of the other companies and see if they have that same requirement?
I spend so much time. I said
I'm sure.
The last thing. So I'm using Wise right now, but I need to set something up that's better.
Right.
I may go back to them. I don't know. I just found it like, I can't believe they're not accepting these incredible professionals that know all my money. I just don't know.
So let me answer that in another way, real quick. These other people, they're financial advisors, licensed, not licensed. Are they accountants?
They're all accountants.
They're just not CPAs.
Financial advisor who, when I got divorced and was coming to Israel, I paid her a lot of money to work it all out. Why don't they, accept her?
Right. No, that's a great question. So I know that when in the mortgage world, there are certain times where you need a CPA letter, and it needs to be from a certified public accountant. And that's a Bank of Israel requirement. It may be a similar situation here. I don't know enough about that, but I could suggest 2 things. One is to call another company and start the conversation out with that. Yeah. Don't go into how much, or maybe they'll wonder how much, but just say, does it need to be a CPA or not? Tell me that now. Yep. That's A. And B, try and go back to the, depending on who the people are there, but
I'm
go
going to
back
go
to them.
back to Israel Transfer. Maybe
Yeah.
this one agent had it wrong. That's quite possible.
Yeah.
Okay,
Try that.
thank you.
Try
Thank
that.
you.
My pleasure.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Sure, sir.
When you transfer money from the USA, is it better to send them and come here in shekels or in dollars?
It will probably be a numbers game at the end there, because you're either going
Let's
to.
say $20,000.
No. I am not going to calculate. I don't know how to calculate that for you. But what I'm saying is, you're going to have to transfer currency, convert the currency at some point. Okay.
Okay.
From my experience, banks in America will, if they'll even do it, will probably take a very high conversion rate and fee to change your dollars into shekels and then transfer a foreign currency from the US to Israel, even if it's coming in shekel in Israel. Okay? So where you may have a lower fee, maybe because you paid to get money here in Israel also, right? You paid to accept your own money. So your incoming fee may be less because it's in shekel versus dollars. I think you would lose a lot along the way by conducting the conversion there, where it's not a relatively common thing for your specific bank to convert dollars to shekels, whereas here it is much more common for the bank to get dollars and convert it into shekels. That's a more reasonable transaction here in Israel. So you would have to check all the fees that you're paying on both ends, but my experience and my gut will tell me that it would be better to transfer it in dollars to Israel and convert it into shekels here.
Okay, one more question.
Can I just add to?
If you got dollars in your bank here, can you take them out as dollars again, or it has to be converted?
There are banks that have clerks still, like a cashier, that have money and cash. Okay. They were probably the only, no, that's not true. ATMs also, you should be able to. You may need to, I touched on this earlier, you may need to have a code opened and added to your account, to your shekel account. Let's just, to make it easy, let's call a shekel account is the code 1. A dollar is maybe 2 and euros 3. So they need to open up the 2 and the 3 if you want to be able to conduct transactions of any sort in that currency. Okay. Now, if you wire to yourself $1,000 and they say, "Oh, no problem, fine, we'll accept the $1,000," they will automatically put that code into your account, and you'll have the dollars. All of a sudden, you have a new line that says US dollars and have $1,000 there. If you want to take that out of an ATM, you probably can do that. Some ATMs. Or you'll have to do it from a clerk that has cash, but it's not as common a thing anymore. It depends what you need the money for. If you want to give it to somebody here in dollars, you can probably take it out from a cashier or some ATMs.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Okay.
It's Zach.
Yes, sir. How are you?
Okay.
Good. Thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question. Purchasing a house, I drew an agreement with the attorney up to give 33% down, and in a year's time to pay the second 2/3 to pay off the house. There's a guarantor involved in the details of the contract, and the guarantee paid the 33%. What type of receipt should I get from my guarantor to prove that?
Who's the guarantor? Is that a person or a company?
Person. It's a person, personal person, a friend.
So that person paid on your behalf 33% of the money to the seller?
Yes.
And is the seller a company or an individual?
Individual.
You should ask your lawyer to have a document drawn up immediately that it will be stamped by both sides that says that that the money was transferred. It should be
Okay.
It should be not so much an addendum to the contract, but an unofficial addendum to the already existing contract, is that a first payment was made already, agreed on by both sides, and added to the purchase file, for lack of a better word.
Okay, great, thank you. And I have one piece, it's former question was about providing a letter or from a CPA. I had a similar large transfer from the States, and they told me to get a CPA to prove my source of money. And I went to a lawyer and paid a small amount, and within 2 days, my money from the States had got here to Israel and was released, and I had access to it. And so
Without the CPA letter?
it was actually, I actually hired a lawyer, and it was just like he drew like a 2-page questionnaire up, and I answered the questions. He signed it. He took it to the bank the next day, and my bank had held my account transfer for 2 weeks, and in 2 days I had the money here in Israel.
Same thing.
Amazing.
That you can have a lawyer do exactly what this gentleman is saying. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was
Great.
pretty reasonable rate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Dale.
Yeah, shalom.
Jonathan, your hand has been up for a while, Mr. Liber. Is it still relevant?
Yeah. 2 questions. Number one is there any problem using credit cards in the U.S. and just paying from a U.S. bank? I've been doing that on all of my visits using credit cards, and no one's returned them down yet.
I'm sure that you've seen, first of all, probably not, no, but I'm sure that you've seen on your statement that, there's a chunk of conversion fees and foreign transaction fees.
I usually use cards that have no transactions fees. There's a couple out there that I've been using, so.
Great. Yeah. Most places you may come across, and Tippy and Ronnie, if you have any input on this, you may come across certain places that won't take a foreign credit card or won't accept payment like that. But so long as you are able to and have been, and it works for you, keep on going.
Okay. Next question is, it's cost me $40 a wire transfer every time I send money to Israel transfer. Is there a way to do it directly from my bank to another bank without having the wires? Is there a small fee, a small transfer that won't get into a wire situation?
From abroad to here?
Yeah, everything has to be wired. Can I do it like directly from bank to bank, like I do from my banks in the States?
No, it's going to be a wire transfer of some sort.
Okay.
And the fees are probably comparable, if not higher at the bank, but negotiable, so.
Okay.
Why?
Great.
Why not give them a physical check? Less expensive.
What does that mean?
That means you go into a teller, you hand them $5,000 American check from your checking account or from your mutual fund checking account, and you hand them in, and they charge you a specific fee for that check in order for them to take it, deposit it, and convert it into shekels, and it's less expensive than wire transfer.
Well, Mr. Hoff, thank you. That may be the case, and I encourage you to guys share whatever information you can.
It can
But
take
if you
up to
remember,
2 months for a check to clear.
right,
Banks do
not just
clear
that, not
checks
just that. If you remember, I said this, and this is factual from a few days ago. There are some banks that will not do that at all. I was sitting in a bank and I said, "What is your policy on dollar checks?" And they said, "Not even going to look at it." Whereas an hour later, I was at another bank and they said, "Well, it's a case by case kind of thing. If it's Mr. Hoff sending money to Mr. Hoff, maybe that'll be easier. If Mr. Hoff has a lot of transactions here and we like him and we trust him, that'll be a little easier. If it's a one-time thing and it's a large amount, it may, like Tippy said, sit for 2 months while it's being reviewed and stuff like that." And that's what the main anger, for lack of a better word, but frustration, that's a better word, that Olim and Anglos and anybody for that matter transferring money from another country into Israel are dealing with. There are restrictions, there are differences between institutions, and it's enough to drive you crazy. But if you find something that works for you, such as Mr. Liber has for him, stick with it, go with it. You know what I mean? And Mr. Porno said he's going to be transferring money all the time. He's going to have to figure something out. Why is this not going to be a long-term solution? He'll conduct this research, and if you, Mr. Huff, have a place where you can deposit a check and you're happy with the fee, and they'll do it, and they don't give you a hard time, amazing, great, keep on doing it.
Can I just say something? I put in the chat here and will be in the, this is being recorded and the link to the recording will be sent to you in the next couple of days. And there'll be another few links in the email itself. And there's a link that I put in the chat here. We have an article about different ways to transfer money. And there's no one answer. What's the best way? What's the easiest way? What's the least expensive way? There's so many different parameters to take into account. And one thing that never came up, and I'm just going to, it's in the article, is, for example, going to a money changer. At one point, a money changer, we would think of that as somebody in the alleyway, in the back alley, and that's illegal. But no, there are legal money changers. You just have to, I'm not saying that's the way to go. I'm saying it's a possible way to go. And before somebody tried to, Youth was asking you, what would be the cheapest way or the best way? There's no one answer. It depends on so many things. So read that article. Again, you don't have to copy the link at the end of the session. You can all export the chat. I'm just going to say that by going on the three dots at the very bottom of the screen to the right, and you can export the chat with all the links. But the important links will be sent in the email follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tippy.
Thank you. I have another, yes, if you don't mind. You said before, Paybox, opening an account, or BIT, opening an account. I'm not familiar with those two, but if you do want to transfer from family to family or friends, and they don't have Zelle or Venmo here, what about the bank giving you a way to do it? Does the bank offer a way that I can go from my bank A to your bank C and have a bank-to-bank transfer to your account there? Is that something that can happen?
Yes, relatively easily, either on the app or on a website. And like we said, also by going in, the cost that you'll pay for each one is different. If you go into the bank, absolutely, you just give them. Most bank accounts here have three important pieces of information: the bank number, there you go, the bank number, the branch number, and the account number. Okay, if you have those three pieces of information, you can go into your app or your bank account, the site online, put that in, and you'll send the money. It's relatively easy. Costs a shekel 65 usually on average. But you can just as easily walk into the, not just as easy because there's fewer clerks and appointments and all these annoying things nowadays. But yes, a clerk can do the same thing bank to bank in Israel. It's not so hard it's not hard at all between different banks. It doesn't have to be the same bank at all.
And for those that didn't see the chat, another option is Capital One 360. If you open a Capital One 360 account, then you can deposit money into the account. You can use your Capital One 360 card, go to an ATM machine. Most will accept it, and you're only going to have to pay the ATM fee. And that's good for smaller amounts of money and maybe up to a couple $1,000s. But that's a way to do it without paying any additional fees generally.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Mr. Hoffman, shoot.
Hi,
You're still on mute. You're on mute. 1 second, ma'am.
Sorry
about that. So I just to let people know, there are two places where I found that foreign credit cards are very limited in what they work and how they work. The main one has been gas stations. A lot of gas stations will not accept foreign credit cards, and I haven't found any that will allow you to do more than 200 shekel at once, which isn't enough to fill up an ordinary car. So that's limited. You can always pay with cash for gas stations or whatever, but that's very limited. And also in places where a lot of places offer payment plans, not that those are always the best idea, but those generally are only Israeli credit cards.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
So I think my question is related to the payment plan thing. I've noticed, like at a supermarket, for example, when I go to pay with my credit card from my bank, that if your total is over a certain amount, let's say I think it's 200 shekels or something, they give you an option to pay the whole thing or do it in like payments. And I don't quite understand that. Or is there a fee associated with doing it in payments or that sort of thing?
Yes, can I answer that one? Okay.
Of course, yes.
Okay, so first of all, I apologize. I know my head is like in and out. I'm in less than optimal conditions, but I am here, and I'm going to answer your question in a second, but I'm going to play moderator here. I think we're going to need to wrap it up after this question and further questions. A plug to contact us to star 3680. Send us an email that we're here to help you. That was Marion who asked the question. So you are correct that you're often told you can pay in payments. You need to be very careful. If they say, do you want to divide the payment up into 2 or 3? Sometimes in the holidays, they'll tell you closer to the holidays, they'll say you can divide it up to, or you can postpone the payment till next month, the month after. As long as it's not called credit in Hebrew, then you're not being charged extra. Okay. If you pay, say your bill is 1,000 and you say, let's divide it into 2 payments, as long, if for it to be credit, okay. And that's like the old fashioned credit that we once knew, or some of us who are old enough knew in the States. As long as it's not credit, but it's tashlumim, then it shouldn't incur any type of interest or extra fee. So you just need to really, really be sure. In order to do things by credit, as they call it, credit, it's not something that's going to happen by chance. You're going to have to sign for it, and be aware, because that is a lot of interest. Okay. The only thing I'm going to say is, and I'm not a financial advisor, but if you're buying something and you're dividing everything up into 2 months or 3 months, unless you know that you have a lot of money coming in next month for some reason, you're just postponing the inevitable, so to speak. So again, that wasn't your question, so I don't want to answer too much, but just if you're dividing up your payments, just don't forget that that's going to be in your budget for next month, excuse me. The other thing is the credit ceiling that you have on your card is going to be carried over from 1 month to the next. So if you have 10,000 shekel credit ceiling, it might not make a difference if you're turning over 500 shekel. But if you have a 2,000 shekel credit ceiling, which some new only have, which is a low ceiling because they don't have any salary coming in or any type of money coming in on a regular basis, if they're turning over the credit from 1 month to the next, the amount from 1 month to the next, they're gonna max out, so to speak, on that credit card very, very quickly. Okay. And what we call credit cards in Israel are not
debit cards.
Yeah, exactly. There is a debit card. There is an actual debit card that when you use it, it's taken out of your account that very day or the next day, depending on what time of the day it is, as opposed to what we call credit cards in Israel, Kartis Ashrei,
which is a monthly. Yeah.
To be a little bit choppy there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. That was helpful.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, Tippy, thank you very much for joining. Roni, thank you very much for joining. I hope you guys were able to get answers for all your questions in the chat. Our contact information is in there. Feel free to contact us about this, about any other post Aliyah related stuff. And like I said before, I hope you got something from this. The idea is to try and share information and tidbits and wherever we can. And we look forward to seeing you on more open forums in the future. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.